Now it's time to see how it all fits together. Remember the simplified flowchart you saw in the beginning? Well, this is what the detailed version looks like, listing every ecosystem and every indicator. Obviously, you can't read much of the text at this scale, but we're going to walk through how ecosystem integrity is calculated for each ecosystem, using maps available in the Blueprint 2.2 data gallery on the South Atlantic LCC Conservation Planning Atlas. We start with the South Atlantic region. The region is divided into 8 different ecosystems with defined spatial boundaries. Each pixel within the South Atlantic geography is assigned to one ecosystem. You might notice that the legend labels this layer Blueprint 2.1. That's because each layer is named after the blueprint in which it was most recently updated. Let's start with the Upland hardwood ecosystem and move gradually toward the coast. If you recall, ecosystem integrity is measured by a suite of different natural and cultural resource indicators. For all the indicator maps, darker colors indicate better condition or higher scores. We'll start with the indicators that are specific to the upland hardwood ecosystem. This is upland hardwood birds, an index of habitat suitability for 7 bird species. Urban open space is an index based on the distance of urban areas from open space. Now we're moving on to cross-ecosystem indicators. These apply to many different ecosystems and will appear over and over again in determining ecosystem integrity. The freshwater aquatic indicators measure the integrity of rivers and streams. This is riparian buffers, an index of natural habitat surrounding rivers and streams. We're looking at the full extent of this indicator here across the whole region, but in the upland hardwood calculation, we're only considering where it falls within the upland hardwood ecosystem boundary. Permeable surface measures the percent of non-impervious land cover by catchment. Imperiled aquatic species measures the number of aquatic species in each watershed that are ranked as G1 or G2 or are federally listed as threatened or endangered. That's it for the freshwater aquatic indicators. Next are the landscapes indicators. These are intended to capture the connections across terrestrial systems. Low road density is an index of areas with few roads that represents habitat fragmentation. Low urban historic landscapes is an index of sites on the National Register of Historic Places surrounded by limited urban development. Resilient biodiversity hotspots is an index of mostly natural, high-diversity areas that are potentially resilient to climate change. That's all the landscapes indicators. Next, we'll look at the waterscapes indicators, which are intended to capture the connections across aquatic systems. We're still imagining all these cross-ecosystem indicators clipped down to the upland hardwood boundary. Network complexity depicts the number of different stream size classes in a river network not separated by large dams. Migratory fish connectivity is an index capturing how far upstream migratory fish have been observed. That is all the indicators used in the upland hardwood ecosystem. We run those indicators through zonation and it provides this layer as an output, the ecosystem integrity score. Look familiar? Each pixel in that ecosystem is now ranked on a continuous scale according to its importance for the indicators. The pixel with the lowest collective indicator value has the lowest score and was the first pixel to be dropped by the model. It's the darkest red. The pixel with the highest collective indicator value has the highest score and was the last pixel to remain in the model. It's a dark blue. Next is pine and prairie. We'll move more quickly now that we've walked through one. Starting with ecosystem-specific indicators. Regularly burned habitat is an indicator of acres of fire-maintained open canopy habitat. Pine and prairie birds is an index of habitat suitability for 3 bird species. Pine and prairie amphibians draws from the designated Priority Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Areas, or PARCAs, within the ecosystem. Now on to the cross-ecosystem indicators, remembering that we're only using the portion of the indicator within pine and prairie. So we add in the freshwater aquatic indicators, that's riparian buffers, permeable surface, and imperiled aquatic species, the landscapes indicators, that's low road density, low urban historic landscapes, and resilient biodiversity hotspots, plus all the waterscapes indicators, that's network complexity, and migratory fish connectivity. And zonation gives us the ecosystem integrity scores for pine and prairie. On to forested wetland. Forested wetland extent represents the overall acres of forested wetlands currently present in the South Atlantic geography. Forested wetland amphibians draws from the designated Priority Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Areas, or PARCAs, within the ecosystem. Forested wetland birds is an index of habitat suitability for 6 bird species. Then we add all the freshwater aquatic, landscapes, and waterscapes indicators. And we have our forested wetland ecosystem integrity score. Freshwater marsh. Freshwater marsh extent represents the overall acres of freshwater marsh currently present in the South Atlantic geography. Freshwater marsh birds is a continuous indicator of patch size, plus all the freshwater aquatic, landscapes, and waterscapes indicators. And here's our ecosystem score for freshwater marsh. Estuarine is split up into 2 parts for the purposes of zonation: estuarine marsh and estuarine open water. Let's start with the marsh. Water vegetation edge is an index of edge length between open water and vegetation where estuarine waters meet wetland marshes. Wetland patch size, unsurprisingly, is an index based on the size of wetland patches. Coastal condition, as you see on this map, applies to both estuarine marsh and estuarine open water. So in the calculation for this ecosystem, we're using this indicator clipped down to the estuarine marsh extent only. This indicator is a continuous index of water quality, sediment quality, and benthic community condition that reflects the overall abiotic condition of estuarine marshes and open water estuaries. You know what's next: freshwater aquatic, landscapes, and waterscapes. And here's our ecosystem score for estuarine marsh. Now on to the other half of estuaries, estuarine open water. This time, we're using the coastal condition indicator clipped down to the estuarine open water extent only. This is the only indicator used in this system. Because only one indicator covers the estuarine open water area, it was not necessary to use zonation to prioritize this ecosystem. Instead, the ecosystem score is based only on coastal condition, processed to match the zonation outputs from other ecosystems so we can use it in the same way. Maritime forest. This ecosystem only has one ecosystem-specific indicator, maritime forest extent. It represents the overall acres of maritime forest currently present in the South Atlantic geography. Then we add freshwater aquatic, landscapes, and waterscapes. And here's our ecosystem score for maritime forest. Almost done. Beach and dune. Unaltered beach is an index of impacts from hardened structures like jetties, groins, and human infrastructure. Beach birds is a continuous index of habitat suitability for 4 shorebird species. Next, of course, are the freshwater aquatic, landscapes, and waterscapes indicators. And here's our ecosystem score for beach and dune. Last but not least, marine. Potential hard bottom condition measures the protected status or potential stress of solid substrate and rocky outcroppings on the ocean floor. Marine mammals is a continuous index of dolphin and whale density based on monthly density predictions for 10 species of cetaceans, also known as toothed whales, and yearly density predictions for 3 rarer cetacean species. Marine birds is a continuous index of highly productive areas for birds that feed exclusively or mainly at sea, using seasonal predictions of relative abundance for 16 species of marine birds. With that, we get the marine ecosystem integrity score.